Simon & Schuster Audioworks presents Star Trek: Windows on a Lost World by V.E. Mitchell, performed by Walter Koenig.
The orangish-yellow star in the Dulcifer cluster grew larger and brighter in the view screen, its attendant planets gleaming like diamond chips in their sun's reflected light. Captain James T. Kirk studied the image, trying to guess what discoveries they would make here. The Enterprise's mission was a routine archaeological inventory of the ancient civilizations in the cluster. Ship's personnel had been supplemented by 20 researchers from the University of Nexqually on Perrin 9, led by Dr. Abdul Ramesh Kaul. Dr. Kaul was currently the Federation's foremost authority on the Mestorian culture, whose runes were widely scattered throughout the quadrant. Kirk let the familiar rhythms of his ship flow soothingly around him. Uhura's voice directing intra-ship messages, Chekhov and Sulu adjusting the ship's approach, Spock at his station correlating the sensor readings as they came into the solar system. "Report, Mr. Spock." The Vulcan raised his head from his scanner display and faced Kirk, his movements controlled and economical. "We are approaching the Carrera system. The star is classified as F9 and has been fading gradually for the last 500,000 years. It is orbited by 10 planets, most of them small, and has a broad zone of widely scattered asteroids between the 5th and 6th planets. The 3rd and 4th planets are currently in the habitable zone, although the climates of both are marginal. At present, neither shows long-range readings that would indicate the presence of intelligent life." In other words, Spock, 2 possible choices for us to explore. The possibility also exists, Captain, that artifacts may remain in the asteroid belt. The Mestorians often established orbiting habitats in remote sections of systems that they did not otherwise occupy. A detailed survey would be required to establish whether such habitats were present in this system. Knowing he would regret asking, Kirk took the bait. How long would it take to perform such a survey? Spock paused, raising one eyebrow. "It will take 7.25 days to scan the asteroid belt with sufficient resolution to ensure that we have not missed any potential Mestorian artifacts. We should, in any case, conduct such a survey. If we confine ourselves to investigating only the planets, we risk overlooking significant discoveries. This quadrant contains an anomalously high number of orphan archaeological sites for which we have no context. It is possible that the smaller planetary bodies, or the asteroid belt, may contain information that will allow us to determine predecessor or successor cultures for some of these isolated remains." Kirk suppressed a groan. "I'll make you a deal, Mr. Spock. You can survey all the asteroids you like, if we find something on one of those planets to keep our passengers busy in the meantime. They're getting anxious to do some serious work." "Agreed, Captain." Kirk shifted his attention to the main view screen and wondered which would it be, 3rd planet or 4th. By late afternoon, the verdict was in, the 4th planet. Kirk scheduled a briefing for the Enterprise's researchers and the visiting archaeologists to plan their investigation. Kirk, Spock, and McCoy took seats on one side of the table and waited for the archaeologists to sort themselves into their places. Each had brought a personal data pad and several data tapes, as if unsure what information they needed for the briefing. Dr. Abdul Ramesh Kaul was a short, wiry man with teak-colored skin, darkened by recent weeks of field work. He regarded everything with an impish twinkle in his eye.
Forgive our disarray. We try always to be completely prepared.
His two chief assistants could not have been chosen to provide a greater contrast to each other or to their leader. One glance at Dr. Talika Nayar identified her as a native of a high-gravity planet. She was short and wide, with mousy brown hair and a huge beak of a nose. Her planet, the Helifa, had recently joined the Federation, and Talika's assignment to this expedition was the first contact anyone on the Enterprise had had with her people. The Helifa was a strongly matriarchal society, and Talika was having trouble accepting the equality that prevailed on the Enterprise. In contrast, Dr. Meredith Lassiter was delicate and willowy, with luminous white blonde hair and sea-green eyes. Her physique suggested that she had been raised on the moon or a low-gravity orbital habitat. Lassiter slid into her seat and began fiddling with a data tape. She seemed as out of place on the archaeological team as the Dehelephant. When everyone was settled, Spock called up his scans of the planet. Caretta 4 is a Class M planet with a gravity 0.85 of Earth. The oxygen content of the atmosphere is below optimum for humans, although it is well within the range tolerated by Vulcans. The climate is cool to cold at most sites due to the cooling of the star in the solar system. Preliminary scans have identified a number of sites worthy of exploration. Dr. Call nodded at Lassiter, who looked up from the data tape. We have run analyses on the 5 largest sites to select our initial survey target. Each site has unique characteristics that should be explored, but we feel that Site J3 is the best choice for our first look at the Caretian civilization. Talika requested a closer view of the site. The screen zoomed in on the area, a rolling floodplain below column cliffs carved from a dark, fissured rock. Low mounds marked the ruins of several large structures. Sensors less weathering at Site J3 show. Better preserved should artifacts from destruction by natural causes be. Small burial of major structures, later abandonment than elsewhere suggests. Spock focused the screen on a large mound near the cliffs. This structure was one of the last built on the planet, judging by the thickness of the soil covering and the spectral analyses of the quarries in the vicinity. We estimate an age in excess of 100,000 years. Dr. Call leaned forward, drumming his fingers against the table. 100,000 years is somewhat younger than we would expect for Mesotorian ruins in this sector. Construction on even such a modest scale as the ruins we see here would have been beyond their capabilities. Kirk nodded to close down the scientific speculations. Clearly they were not going to get any answers without going down to the planet. Mr. Spock, what's your recommendation? Spock glanced at his display. The extreme antiquity of these ruins make it virtually impossible to date them from orbit. To obtain precise information, we will have to beam down to the planet. I concur with the recommendation of Dr. Call's team to study Site J3 first. In addition to the scientific reasons they have already cited, the location offers a sheltered area to set up a base camp. McCoy nodded. The vegetation is sparse in this area due to a combination of low rainfall and cool temperatures. This minimizes the chance of running into dangerous native life forms. About all we'll have to watch out for is this world's equivalent of poisonous snakes or insects. Beyond that, the biggest danger is going to be tripping over ourselves and our equipment. Kirk noted that the archaeologists appeared eager to get down to the planet, and he saw no reason to deny them their wish. Very well. We'll run detailed sensor scans of the site while Dr. Call's people work out their excavation plan. The survey team will beam down at first light. Meeting dismissed. Kirk made his escape before anyone dragged him into the detailed planning. He headed for the relative peace of the bridge, where he could decide who from the Enterprise was joining the landing party. Chekhov stared at his landing party assignment. He deactivated the screen and turned away. Lieutenant Hikaru Sulu fell in step with him as they left his quarters and headed for the recreation room. "It's not fair. Why me? Why do I have to be the person who gets stuck with the Dahelifan? To listen to her talk, you would think that God herself was from Dahelifa and that she used that planet as her base for creating the universe." Sulu ducked his head to hide a grin. "Do you have proof she didn't?" He glanced at Chekhov from the corner of his eye. As he expected, Chekhov still hadn't gotten the joke. While Chekhov claimed half the Federation's technology was invented in his native Russia, the matriarchal Dahelifans knew that everything in the universe came from their planet. Although he couldn't justify the feeling, Sulu was relieved to miss this particular planet-side excursion. As the transporter beam released him, Kirk felt a special zip in the air, a distinctive shiver in the ground beneath his feet. He had never been able to define, even to himself, why the first few seconds on any new planet seemed so charged with hidden potential. He moved away from the beam-down point to let the next group materialize. Spock followed him, activating his tricorder to scan the area for the fine details that ship's sensors could not detect. 4 security guards fanned out to confirm the landing site for the shuttlecraft Columbus, checking the terrain and other site factors against the Enterprise's sensor readings. Columbus carried a cargo of excavating tools, power packs, and other heavy equipment. The archaeologists wanted the shuttlecraft close to their working site without having it on top of any important artifacts. Talika, Chekhov, Call, and 3 archaeological technicians materialized next. The scientists unlimbered their tricorders and began an in-depth site survey. Chekhov joined Kirk, watching the archaeologist with a wary expression on his boyish face. "What is our plan, Captain?" "Right now, we wait for the experts to tell us." Chekhov looked around. From the ground, the site appeared larger and more desolate than it had from the crisp, impersonal reports of the ship's sensors. Immense walls of fissured basalt, fractured into columns, reached for the sky like a staircase designed for giants. The 1,000-meter vertical sweep of the cliffs was interrupted by irregularly spaced ledges covered with shattered rock. More talus had collected below the towering basalt walls, burying some of the ruins. A fast-moving river swept past, its surface ruffled to white-crested waves by the stiff breeze blowing up the canyon. Closer to them, sparse blades of dried grass and a few sagebrush-like bushes rustled in the wind. Spock rejoined Kirk and Chekhov, studying his tricorder with an air of intense concentration. "This is most unusual. My tricorder readings suggest that these ruins are almost twice as old as we originally estimated." Chekhov shook his head in disbelief. "That would make them over 200,000 years old." Kirk frowned, trying to remember the history of this sector. He wasn't sure, but he thought that the Mestorian civilization had risen about 150,000 years ago. If Spock's newest readings were correct, these ruins were far too old to belong to any known civilization. "Well, Mr. Spock, I take it that our friends will have some trouble dealing with that age." "That is correct, Captain. The earliest known Mestorian ruins are dated at 172,500 years before the present. It is possible that these structures come from an earlier period of the Mestorian civilization, but that would require a drastic revision of our current theories concerning their expansion into this part of the galaxy." Kirk scanned the desolate landscape around them. It seemed an unlikely place to discover anything that would destroy the Federation's painstakingly reconstructed history of this sector. "I should think there would be enormous obstacles to any major reinterpretations." "Rather. However, we must consider that each new piece of information we discover contains the potential for rendering inoperative all our previous assumptions about a given situation." Chekhov scuffed a rock toward the archaeologists.
I predict that our friends will be most unhappy when they discover that this planet does not fit any of their grand theories.
Glancing toward Call's team, Kirk saw that they were huddled in a group, arguing about something. It looks like you're right, Mr. Chekhov. Shall we see what they found? By the time the 3 Enterprise officers reached the archaeologists, the argument had escalated almost to the point of blows. Cole's voice was soft, but his tone was implacable.
It is quite impossible to have so ancient a date for Mestorian ruins. Your sensor readings must be in error.
Talika responded with a voice like the growl of an approaching thunderstorm.
I not mistake make. 5 times checked I readings to confirm. Inferior Federation machine indefinite results gives. The Heliphon equipment would with 1 reading clearer answers show. Ruins for Mestorian too old are. Therefore, from more ancient civilization must be.
Spock stepped forward to interrupt the argument, holding out his tricorder. My tricorder also reports extreme age for these ruins, Dr. Call. It would appear that we are dealing with a find of extreme importance. May I congratulate you on your good fortune in discovering these ruins. Dr. Call turned towards Spock, blinking rapidly. Kirk could almost hear the relay snapping in Call's head as he tried to shift his processing circuits.
That is true, Mr. Spock. To catalog a find of such magnitude will require additional time and manpower. I hope, Captain Kirk, that you will consider the difficulty of this task and assign me the resources necessary to conduct the research.
I understand, Dr. Call. I'll assign extra crewmen to help with your preliminary investigations. Kirk turned away, feeling a sudden need to put some space between himself and Dr. Call. The last few minutes had made him wonder if he really wanted anything to do with Karata 4 after all. Inexplicably, the image of an ancient plague ship floated into his mind. A galleon that drifted across the ocean, majestic and serene, abandoned by all except the rats. Kirk pushed the image away. Karata 4 must be getting to him. He looked around, checking the desolate landscape for visible threats, but saw only his own people. Wondering what subliminal games his mind was playing, Kirk reached for his communicator to ask for the extra help that Dr. Call had requested. Why do I have all the luck? Chekhov wondered as he followed Talika along the base of the cliffs. He would have been perfectly delighted to coordinate the Columbus's landing and to set up their base of operations, making sure the equipment was accessible and ready for use. Instead, he had been assigned to help Talika survey the ruins for the most promising sites at which to begin their excavations. She skipped across the hexagonal plates of loose rock as if they were minor annoyances little larger than pebbles. Her life on a heavy-gravity world had given her a massive strength in her lower body, and the power of her muscles let her bound over obstacles that Chekhov had to strain to surmount. Talika paused to let Chekhov clamber over a pile of loose rock.
Why did not Kirk to me someone competent to sign? Why feeble male who barely on 2 feet stays?
Chekhov tested a large boulder for stability, felt it totter, and then settle more firmly into a cradle of smaller stones.
You are used to twice this much gravity. Everybody on the Enterprise would have trouble keeping up with the pace you are setting. What is the hurry? Hurry is assignment with distinction to complete. Although how to work am I with flimsiest of Federation devices and only most substandard assistance know I not. On the Helifa, such obstacles to accomplishment we permit not.
Her words stung Chekhov into replying.
This is not the Helifa, and we are not obstructing your work. Then what explanation give you for assigning assistant and male one at that, so weak he barely his own mass supports? How carry you samples or move rocks?
Sorry I asked. Chekhov reached down to check his right ankle. He had turned it on the last stretch when a rock had rolled beneath his boot, but he found no swelling or tenderness in the joint. A scowl twisted Talika's face as she watched.
That my meaning is, you Federation Tiska, all weaklings are. You like little girls behave, who have not to ritual house gone for duties and responsibilities of adults to learn. How like boy-child whimpering and crying because rocks in path are. Why not back to ship go and let me without interference to work finish?
Chekhov bit his tongue to hold back an angry reply. Talika's greater physical strength, combined with her reluctance to pay any attention to him, made it almost impossible for him to do his job. The worst of it was that her impatience could easily send her charging into danger. I would be glad to let you do your job without interference. However, I ask that you grant me the same courtesy. I am to assist you with your exploration, and specifically to watch out for any unanticipated dangers. We know nothing about this planet. Therefore, the chances are very great that we will not recognize something dangerous until it attacks us. Talika snorted like the large draft horse Chekhov had seen in the Moscow Animal Preserve when he was a child.
What possible danger could there on deserted planet be? Weaklings like Federation Tiska might for very fine reason, but as the Helafon, nothing to fear have I.
Chekhov stood up, moving cautiously until he was sure the ankle would hold his weight. I suppose the mountain will ask if you are the Helafon before it falls on you. Or perhaps the snake will request an introduction before it strikes.
I from none the Helafon such cowardice expect. However, to such whinings, I will listen not.
Talika started off without waiting for Chekhov, moving at a rapid pace, despite the irregularly shaped blocks of rock beneath her boots. Chekhov picked his way cautiously across the loose rock. They had been moving along the cliffs for the last hour, chasing ephemeral signs of the alien ruins, and the talus piles had grown larger and more unstable. Looking at the fissured wall, Chekhov wondered if the rubble was deeper here because the rocks were naturally more broken, or if someone had blasted the cliffs to bury something. He activated his tricorder and began scanning.
Talika bellowed at him. Would you your boots quit dragging and over here get?
In spite of himself, Chekhov was startled and jumped. Why don't you be a little more polite? At least ask why I've got my tricorder out before you start yelling insults. She started back toward him, a puzzled frown on her face.
For what reason should you your tricorder have out? Our scans nothing here show to investigate. Why time waste?
He gestured toward the cliffs beside him. The rocks are all shattered here, as if someone tried to blow up this entire cliff. I would guess that whatever they wanted to bury, we would be interested in finding it. The question is, how big is this object and how well is it hidden? Talika surveyed the talus, wearing her lower lip with her large square teeth. Finally, she grunted and activated her own tricorder. They worked their way back and forth across the hill for the next half an hour with no results. Chekhov was beginning to doubt his hunch when his tricorder gave him a flicker of an anomalous reading. I found something! He pointed toward the spot to give Talika the bearing. She swung her tricorder around, sweeping the general area. After the fifth sweep, she fiddled with the controls and her frown deepened.
Nothing.
Chekhov adjusted his tricorder, and to his dismay, the anomaly disappeared. Puzzled, he swept the scanner across a wider area. Twice the readings flickered, then smoothed to the expected background values. If I did not know better, I would think that someone was jamming us. Chekhov gestured to Talika, signaling for her to wait while he picked his way across the talus to join her. If there is a device down there, it must still be operating at a very low level. It seems able to detect us when we make enough noise, but if it does not know our location, it apparently cannot lock
onto the radiation from our tricorders. Do you have any suggestions for dealing with such an object? How know you this? This impossible is, unlike completely to anything known. I agree that it does not act like anything I've seen before. Perhaps we are seeing a defense mechanism designed to protect whatever is here. If someone wanted to hide an object, or if they wanted to protect it from destruction, they would not want it to register on anyone's sensors. If someone had placed a jamming field generator at the base of these cliffs, it would prevent us from detecting anything beneath the rocks. Talika nodded. Job to find artifacts is. Therefore, as working hypothesis, assumption that object exists is made. Talika's eyes darted back and forth as she studied the loose rocks below them. If I downhill go, making much noise, perhaps sensors think both away have gone. You here wait, being very quiet, and when I hand raise, both of us for object in area scan. Do you other way to solve problem C? Let's do it. Chekhov settled himself on a boulder and deactivated his tricorder. Nodding her approval, Talika started down the slope, picking an area covered with fist-sized rocks and slithering down it as though she were skiing. She reached the bottom of the slope, surrounded by a moving, clattering, grinding mass of small rocks. Finally, Talika pointed her tricorder toward the talus slope and signaled for Chekhov to activate his. He hit the switch and was rewarded immediately. Low-level power readings were coming from beneath the pile of shattered rock. The source was small, less than 3 meters in any of its dimensions. Struggling to control his excitement, Chekhov repeated his scan both to confirm the existence of the artifact and to check his bearings. Anything that small, buried under so many tons of rock, would not be easy to excavate. After almost 5 minutes of cautious movement, coupled with constant readings, a rock slipped from beneath his foot. At the first clatter from the bouncing stone, the power readings terminated. But Talika let a scream of triumph rip through the valley.
Alive it is! After so much time, it's still working is!
Even running the excavators non-stop, it took almost 12 hours to remove the rock from the mountainside that buried the artifact. Chekhov alternated between impatience to learn what he and Talika had discovered and an equally strong desire to abandon the planet without ever seeing what the excavators would uncover. As the sun slid below the rim of the canyon and the shadows deepened, Kirk ordered Sulu to beam down 6 high-powered floodlights, and the digging continued. The first landing party returned to the Enterprise for the night. Chekhov spent the evening regaling Sulu with his morning's adventures, including comparing Kareta 4's barren landscapes to the desolate sweep of Russia's northern steppes. At first, he was relieved to be on the ship, warm and far from the bleak, eerie planet. However, the longer he thought about the artifact, the more curious he became. What had they found? Finally, he requested permission to return to the planet. Kirk's voice held an unmistakable note of laughter when he came on the intercom. Everyone else on the landing party has already asked. You're the last. Be ready to beam down in 15 minutes. Chekhov beamed down with Kirk and McCoy into the circle of brightness cast by the floodlights. Chekhov examined the cliff face, looking for the spot where he and Talika had crossed the talus slope that morning. He couldn't find it. The area had changed too much. Where the artifact had been covered by 100 meters of broken rock, only a small mound remained. The rest of the rubble had been moved by the excavators, one boulder at a time, exposing the sharp line of the cliffs. but the excavation seemed to have come to a standstill. Spock returned from talking to the technicians. "Captain, the sensors no longer seem to be able to locate the object beneath the rocks." Remembering how the artifact had pulled the same trick on him and Talika that morning, Chekhov started forward to see if he could help. As he did, the air shimmered and Scott materialized.
I told you to take care of your equipment, Aronson. You cannot expect it to work properly if you do not make the calibration runs every hour.
"We did that, Mr. Scott. We haven't been taking any shortcuts, I promise you." Scott pushed between the technicians and bent over the control panel, punching in the diagnostic sequence. After a long pause, his scowl deepened.
"That's not possible. The diagnostics program reports that the anomaly never was there."
Spock joined Scott. "If we believe the current readings, we have been pursuing a mirage." Wondering if he could see any resemblance between the present sensor readings and the ones from that morning, Chekhov stepped forward. "May I examine the sensor logs from just before and just after the readings changed? Dr. Talika and I had similar difficulties this morning, but at the time we thought they were caused by the rubble piled above the artifact." The technician hit the playback switch, and the record scrolled down the screen in parallel columns. It took Chekhov a few moments to sort through the data, but when he found it, the anomaly, a 30 cubic meter space for which the sensors reported no data, stood out like a beacon. "Here, just before the sensors begin reporting, only more stones in this place. There is a major spike in the lower frequencies, almost like the power absorption curve of a biaxial shield generator." Kirk joined the group while Spock examined the data. "Mr. Chekhov, your inference that the effect is caused by a biaxial shield generator may be correct. However, if so, it is a device of completely alien manufacture." Kirk gestured sharply toward the displays. "But what's the purpose of the shield, Spock?" "Unknown, Captain. Either someone is taking great pains to conceal an artifact from us, or they are trying to make us believe that something is hidden in this area, when in fact there is nothing. We will not know until we have finished the excavation. Logically, we will either find an artifact, or we will discover that someone created conditions that were intended to convince us that an artifact was present." Kirk turned to his chief engineer. "What is your recommendation, Mr. Scott?"
"At this stage, Captain, we're working blind. We don't know what is rock and what is artifact."
Kirk turned to the crowd that had gathered expectantly around the console. "You heard, everybody. We're reduced to old-fashioned methods to get the job done." The 25 crewmen fell to, lifting the irregular blocks of basalt and shifting them a dozen meters from the artifact. In a surprisingly short time, the broken rock had been cleared away, revealing 4 huge basalt slabs standing on their edges, capped by a 5th. The stone cube was twice as tall as Kirk, and the edges of the stones fit tightly together as though they had been ground to form a tight seal. Kirk shook his head, marveling at the perversity of the universe. Such huge sheets of stone balanced in such a position could not be natural. "Spock, what do the sensors say now?" Spock adjusted a lever and repeated his readings. "Absolutely nothing, Captain. Despite the evidence of our senses, the object does not register on any of our detectors. The logical corollary is that we will be unable to detect any other protections the artifact may possess." McCoy strolled over to join Spock and Kirk.
"How likely do you all expect that to be? This object is hundreds of thousands of years old, but you're saying it's protected by some of the latest and most sophisticated technology known to our science."
"That is correct, Doctor." Kirk gestured both men to silence. "What I need are solid recommendations on how we should proceed. Ideas, anyone? Scott glanced from the displays to the artifact as if to assure himself that the object really was there. A Class B jamming field renders most of our tractor beams and anti-gravity lifters inoperative. However, mechanical methods should serve to open the structure. Spock studied the black cube, his face taut with concentration. It would be illogical to expend so much effort to conceal an object unless it was extremely dangerous. Kirk felt a decision click into place. Nor will we know anything until we open the cube. Taking risks is our business, gentlemen. Let's find out why someone worked so hard to hide that thing from us. Mr. Scott, beam down the equipment you need to open it.
Aye, Captain.
Soon a pile of equipment and 3 more technicians materialized a dozen meters from the artifact. Before long, a spidery construction of poles and braces took shape over the black stone cube. Scotty stepped back, surveying the scaffold with a proprietary air.
If you wouldn't mind, Captain, I would prefer to have everyone except the lads helping me stand back a wee bit when we make our try at the cube.
Good thinking. We'll start clearing the area now. It took some time to convince everyone to retreat to a safe distance and remain there. The archaeologists in particular were hard to persuade. Dr. Call wanted to be near the artifact when it was opened, fearing that the sensors would still be jammed and that his skills as a trained observer would be needed to record the details of the scene as the huge basalt slabs were lifted from their positions. Finally, Kirk agreed to a compromise. He allowed the archaeologists to station themselves halfway between the artifact and the designated perimeter. Then he ordered Scott to activate the winches. The motors hummed to life, first drawing in the slack on the cables, and then pulling against the weight of the slab. At first, nothing happened. Scott increased the power to the winches, and still the slab refused to move. The humming rose to a shrill keening as the motors labored against the weight. The groaning became louder, and Kirk realized it was the sound of the basalt slab scraping against the walls of the cube. With a loud crack and a final shriek of protest, the near end of the slab pulled free. The cube shuddered and came apart, the vertical slabs tilting outward under the pull of the guide cables attached to them. The slabs toppled in slow motion, and a cloud of dust billowed up around the slabs. From the work crew on the platform came the sounds of retching and gagging. Before Kirk could wonder what was happening, the dust cloud reached him. A heavy, nauseating smell permeated the air. Before he had consciously identified the sulfonic gas, Kirk was on the ground, retching. Spock to Enterprise. Emergency beam up. All personnel on the planet. Repeat, emergency beam up now. The morning after the ground crew's brief exposure to saldonic gas, Kirk grimly surveyed the group around the briefing table. The saldonic gas had left him with a headache of monumental proportions and a stomach that felt as though he were coming down with a case of the Belindian flu. Judging from McCoy's complexion, the doctor felt as bad as he did, while Dr. Call and Talika, who had been stationed closer to the artifact, looked even worse. Chekhov was holding himself together mostly by youthful enthusiasm for the mystery presented by the artifact, and Spock's Vulcan control was standing him in good stead. The only person in the room who looked halfway human was Meredith Lassiter, who had monitored the artifact from the safety of the Enterprise. Lassiter cued the image of the artifact onto their screens. This, apparently, is what someone tried so hard to keep us from discovering. The object was about 2 meters high and 4 meters long, but only 10 centimeters thick. The back side was a metallic blue-gray with no scratches or tarnish to mar the finish. The other side reminded Kirk of a pair of plate-glass windows enclosed in a flat black frame. The illusion was enhanced by the lifelike landscape on the left showing a rolling plain covered with knee-deep grass. However, the right side of the object was blank. Chekhov's expression reflected the bewilderment everyone felt. "Is that what we almost got killed for?" Lassiter nodded. What it is, we're not yet certain. However, it appears that the safeguards connected to the stone cube were intended to prevent us from gaining access to this object. Spock put a list of numbers on the screen. This object is definitely the source of the power readings first detected by Dr. Talika and Ensign Chekhov. However, in the time since the field was activated, it had become defective. Stray energy fluctuations escaped the containment field and permitted us to detect the object. As a final note, the power levels emitted by the object climbed steadily for 7.3 hours after we removed the barrier, and have remained constant since then. "Almost like it was charging up its energy cells for something. But what is it waiting for?" Lassiter twisted her fingers through a lock of her pale gold hair. "We have no clear idea of what the object is or what its function might be. We don't even know who left the object here, nor who walled it off like that. We surmise that the Mestorians were responsible for camouflaging the remains of a much older civilization." Kirk looked toward Dr. Call to see if he had any suggestions. His face gone waxy, the senior archaeologist swayed in his seat. McCoy hurried to Call's side and checked his pulse and breathing. "Secondary reaction to the saldanic gas. We were hit by a particularly nasty variant. I'll get him to sickbay." After McCoy helped Dr. Call from the room, Kirk gave the group a moment to settle down. Talika and Lassiter were engaged in a staring contest to decide who would direct the archaeological efforts in Call's absence. Finally, Lassiter broke eye contact and stared down at the table. Talika's voice was heavy and measured. "We must, with greatest care, artifact study. Because of danger, I will explorations personally conduct, using assistant for supplemental data recording. Others will from safe distance investigations observe." At her announcement, Chekhov's face went white. Suppressing a grin, Kirk turned to Chekhov. "Are you volunteering, Mr. Chekhov?" Chekhov's mouth twitched as if he wanted to refuse, but his sense of duty won out. "I would be honored to assist Dr. Talika in investigating the artifact." "Thank you, Ensign. Your enthusiasm is commendable." Kirk turned back to Talika. "When do you propose to begin your work?" "We will in half hour commence."